I spent 10 years building my parents' company, only to find out they secretly gave it to my sister. No warning. No explanation. Not even a thank you. But if you stay with me, I'll show you how I turned betrayal into freedom, and how I built something they could never take away. From the moment I could walk, I walked into construction sites. My earliest memories aren't birthday parties or bedtime stories. They're the smell of fresh lumber, the sound of saws whining through concrete, and the sight of my father's boots, scuffed and dusted with cement. He was my hero, Thomas Dawson, founder of Dawson and Company, a family-run construction firm in the heart of Colorado. And I, Claire Dawson, was his shadow. Every Sunday morning, when other little girls were playing dress-up or watching cartoons, I was tagging along behind my father as he inspected sites. I'd carry a clipboard that had nothing on it and nod seriously when he pointed to foundation cracks. He'd laugh, tousle my hair, and say, "You've got the Dawson grit, Claire. This company'll be yours one day." That promise lodged itself deep inside me, like steel rebar reinforcing my spine. At 8, I knew the difference between a blueprint and a floor plan. By 12, I was filing documents in the back office, organizing invoices, and answering the office phone with my best grown-up voice. The staff all called me Mini Boss. And my dad? He introduced me to clients with a proud arm over my shoulders and the words, "Meet the future of Dawson and Company." I remember one winter when I stayed late with him at the site of a luxury townhouse build. Snow had just started to fall. I was cold and tired, rubbing my gloved hands together. But I refused to say a word. I wanted him to see I could handle the work, no complaints. He looked down at me, offered me his thick flannel jacket, and said, "Someday, when I retire, all this will be yours." I think that was the moment I stopped imagining any other future. I didn't dream of becoming a singer or a marine biologist or even a lawyer like my mother secretly hoped. I wanted only one thing: to build something that would carry our name for generations. And I believed I had to earn it, not just inherit it. That was the Dawson way. You work for what you want. So, I worked. High school was a blur of honors classes and weekend site visits. College was an easy choice, construction management with a minor in business analytics. I turned down internships at tech startups in California and instead spent summers managing concrete schedules and payroll spreadsheets. I graduated top of my class and walked straight into a full-time role at Dawson and Company, bypassing the customary entry-level title because, frankly, I'd been doing the job since I was 16. By 22, I was running our operations team. By 25, I was pulling 80-hour weeks, living off protein bars and iced coffee, managing multi-million-dollar contracts while simultaneously fixing broken printers and calming angry clients. I learned to run the company not because anyone handed me a manual, but because I never imagined doing anything else. The business wasn't just part of my life. It was my life. My friends from college drifted into marriages, kids, yoga retreats in Tulum. I drifted into staff meetings, budget planning, and after-hours calls with subcontractors in 3 time zones. The only consistent thing in my apartment was a suitcase permanently half-packed and a drawer full of company polos. I wasn't resentful. I was proud. Every brick laid, every deal closed, felt like a step toward fulfilling that childhood promise. "You're indispensable," my dad would say. "Couldn't have done this bid without you," our lead architect would add. But praise wasn't what kept me going. What kept me going was the vision that one day I'd take the reins. One day, the keys would be handed to me, not as a favor, but as a passing of the torch. It was the invisible contract between father and daughter. The future was secure because I was earning it, or so I thought. That's the thing about blueprints. You believe you know exactly how it's going to look in the end, until you find out someone changed the design, without telling you. And by then, the walls are already going up. If there was a record for the number of consecutive 80-hour weeks a human being could survive, I'd have held it. I rose before the sun and left the office long after it set. I stopped thinking of meals as social events and started thinking of them as fuel stops. My entire social calendar revolved around job sites, boardrooms, and spreadsheets. My phone never left my side. even when I slept, because emergencies didn't respect business hours.
Client trusted me.
Vendors relied on me. Our crew leads feared me, in a respectful way, I think. I had built our operations team into a machine that could predict delays before they happened. I introduced lean construction protocols that saved us thousands. My custom reporting dashboard became the envy of every competitor who happened to see it. I didn't just keep Dawson and Company running, I made it better, faster, and smarter. But inside, I was running on fumes. I missed weddings. I forgot birthdays. The plants in my apartment died one by one, and I didn't even notice until my cleaning lady left a passive-aggressive sticky note. You might want to water the cactus. I'd laugh when people asked about my work-life balance, as if that was a real option. The job was the life. I didn't resent it. I saw it as noble sacrifice. And then Sophie came back. My older sister Sophie was always the dreamer, the artist, the wanderer. She'd spent her 20s floating between Europe and South America, studying things like color theory and sculpture while living out of hostels and falling in love with men who played guitar in the streets. We'd grown apart, geographically, emotionally, philosophically. But when she returned home after a particularly nasty breakup with a gallery owner in Buenos Aires, our parents welcomed her with open arms.
Of course they did.
That's who they were. What I didn't expect was for her to show up at the office. She started appearing at meetings. Casual at first. Then she got her own office, small, bright, filled with abstract art. Her title? Creative Director. A role that didn't exist until she arrived. Every brand needs a refresh, Dad said, brushing off my raised eyebrow. And Sophie has an eye for design. She worked part-time, took long lunches, left by 4. I worked until midnight. I figured it didn't matter. Let her dabble. I was still the one holding the structure up. Then things started to shift. Clients were invited to brainstorming sessions I wasn't told about. Her marketing ideas, many of which were decent, were praised like divine revelations. When I suggested improvements to her campaign copy, I was told to let the creatives breathe. What hurt most wasn't the workload or even the imbalance. It was the realization that conversations stopped when I walked into the room, that there were meetings I wasn't invited to, that sometimes, when I entered my father's office, I found Sophie already seated, legs crossed, sipping tea, laughing at some private joke I'd never been on. "Don't overwork yourself, Claire," Mom would say, topping off my wine glass at family dinners. Life's not just about spreadsheets. No one said it, but I could feel it. They were grooming her for something. And I, despite the sweat, the loyalty, the sleepless nights, was becoming a background fixture.
Still, I stayed.
Because that promise, the one made in childhood, the one repeated like gospel over decades, still rang in my ears. This company will be yours one day. And if you're told something long enough, you start to believe it's not just possible, it's inevitable. But inevitability is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid confronting betrayal. It happened on a Thursday. I was knee-deep in a contract revision for our largest ongoing project, a luxury senior living facility in Boulder, when I realized a key document was missing from our shared server. The digital filing system had been reorganized recently, supposedly to make things more accessible. Sophie's idea, of course. In practice, it meant nothing was where it used to be. Frustrated, I got up from my desk and made my way to the records room, a chilly back office that still held paper backups of every major contract since 1997. If I couldn't find the digital copy, I'd go old school. I scanned the labels on the cabinet drawers: Anderson Homes, Summit View Retail, Dawson Ownership Records.
Wait.
That last one didn't register immediately. I blinked, stepped back, and looked again. Dawson Ownership Records. I had never seen that label before. Something in my stomach twisted. I pulled open the drawer, and there it was. A thick manila folder stamped confidential in bold red ink. The tab read, "Transfer Agreement, March 15th. My fingers went cold. March 15th was 7 months ago. I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, heart pounding as the meaning slowly came into focus. 75% of Dawson and Company had been transferred to Sophie Dawson. The remaining 25%? Split between my parents. My name appeared nowhere. Not as a stakeholder. Not as a successor. Not even as a witness. The room started to spin. I reached out and braced myself against the filing cabinet. My breath grew short.
Sharp.
The words blurred and sharpened again. I reread the opening paragraph 3 times before the truth finally sank in. They gave it to her. They gave everything to Sophie. The door creaked behind me. I turned around slowly, clutching the folder to my chest like it might vanish if I let go. Eleanor, our office manager of nearly 3 decades, stood in the doorway. Her eyes fell on the file in my hands, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern, and then to guilt. "Claire," she began softly, "did you know about this?" I asked. My voice was barely audible. She looked down at the floor. "Your father asked us not to mention it. He said he'd tell you when the time was right." When the time was right. It came out louder than I intended. The paper in my hands crinkled as my grip tightened. "It's been 7 months, Eleanor." "I'm sorry," she whispered. A million thoughts flooded my mind. Meetings I hadn't been invited to, strategic talks that suddenly excluded me, compliments about Sophie's fresh vision, Mom telling me to relax more. I was the last to know. No worse. They'd made sure I would be the last to know. I walked past Eleanor without another word, the folder still clutched in my hands like a crime scene photo. Back in my office, I locked the door, sat in my chair, and cried for the first time in years. Not out of sadness. Out of betrayal. Out of fury. Out of the unbearable realization that everything I had believed in, sacrificed for, had been a mirage. The blueprint I had built my life around had been altered in secret, and the foundation I thought was mine had already been poured for someone else. The invitation came as it always did. Sunday dinner, 6 p.m., at my parents' house. There was a time when those dinners felt sacred, our only pause from the grind of construction life. My father at the head of the table with his favorite scotch. My mother lighting candles even if it was just roast chicken and mashed potatoes. Sophie bringing wine from some foreign vineyard she'd stumbled across on one of her adventures.
And me,
always arriving late, still in slacks and a button-up, sometimes with blueprints under my arm. But that Sunday, I arrived early. I needed to see their faces before the performance began. I needed to know if they'd look me in the eye, if they were capable of shame. The house was as I remembered it. Pristine lawn. Front porch light on. A ceramic welcome sign my mom insisted gave it character. The scent of rosemary and roasted garlic hit me before I reached the front door. I stepped inside, without knocking. My mother greeted me in an apron, cheeks flushed from the oven. "Claire, you're early," she said with a smile that faltered when she caught my expression. I nodded once. "Can I help with anything?" No. Sophie's got it all under control." "Of course she does." I entered the dining room. The table was set beautifully, wine glasses already poured, napkins folded like swans. Sophie was lighting a centerpiece candle, humming to herself. My father sat in his usual chair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he scanned what looked like a printout of a supply chain spreadsheet. They looked normal, unbothered, as if they hadn't stolen my future and handed it to someone else. My mother called from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready." We sat, toasted, pass bowls, spoke in shallow sentences about weather and road construction. They asked about work, and I responded vaguely. Sophie launched into a description of her new brand identity proposal for Dawson and Company, as if I weren't the one who'd kept the brand alive for a decade. My fork scraped against the edge of my plate. I hadn't taken a bite. Finally, after dessert was served, apple pie with a sugar crust I used to bake with my mom, I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila folder. I placed it on the center of the table. The silence was instant. My father stopped mid-sentence. My mother froze, pie server hovering over her plate. Sophie blinked, her smile dissolving. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked, my voice steady but low. Or was I supposed to find out while balancing our next $1 million project? Claire, my father started. I held up a hand.
No. Please.
I'd like an honest answer. He adjusted his glasses, clearly buying time. It was complicated.
No. Iraplia.
It was calculated. My mother reached for my hand. We didn't mean to hurt you. You just gave away my life's work. Silently. To someone who spent the last decade painting in Italy. Sophie flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? I said, turning to her. Did you know what you were signing? Dad approached me. He said it was the best path forward. And you thought what? That I wouldn't notice? My father's voice sharpened. We needed fresh vision. The industry is evolving, Claire. I evolved it, I said, rising from my chair. I built the dashboard. I implemented the lean protocols. I saved us from bankruptcy during the pandemic. But sure, give it to the one who rebranded our letterhead. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Sweetheart, please. We're family.
Isterte her.
Family doesn't ambush each other with legal transfers. The weight of the betrayal, the months of secrecy, the hollow praise, the casual exclusion, it all collided into that moment. I took a breath, picked up the folder, and tucked it back into my bag. If Sophie owns the company, I said quietly, then let her run it. My father stood. You can't walk away. We've got the Anderson project, the Maxwell bid. I turned to him. I can. And I am. I walked to the front door, the silence behind me thunderous. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. Claire, Sophie called after me. Please wait. I didn't. I walked out into the cold night air, climbed into my car, and didn't look back until the house was a speck in the rearview mirror. And even then, I only looked back once. Monday morning arrived without an alarm. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to a vibrating phone or a calendar alert screaming about site visits and budget meetings. Instead, I woke up in silence. The sun slipped through my blinds with quiet hesitation, as if it too wasn't sure what came next. I lay in bed for nearly an hour, fully dressed in grief. I felt like I'd stepped out of my life and into a vacuum, the kind of stillness that follows a disaster, when the noise stops, but the ringing in your ears remains. By noon, I had made 2 cups of coffee and drunk neither. I stood at my kitchen island, staring at the manila folder like it might demand something more of me. But it said nothing. It had already said too much. I scrolled my phone aimlessly, skipping texts from contractors and emails with subject lines like status update and checking in. They weren't my responsibility anymore. I had made that choice. I needed to believe in it. But belief, I was learning, didn't arrive on command. It had to be rebuilt, brick by emotional brick. I called Melissa, my college roommate and best friend. She was the only person outside the company who knew me as something other than the daughter or the workhorse. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you finally walked away. I didn't respond immediately. Claire? I walked, I said. But I don't know where I'm going. Melissa didn't try to fix it. She just breathed on the other end. Then it's a damn good time to find out. She invited me over for dinner. Real food. Real company. No business talk. I agreed. But first, I needed space. I turned off my work phone and buried it in a drawer. I opened a new journal and, for the first time in years, wrote something that wasn't a project update or a crisis memo. I wrote about the betrayal. I wrote about the promise broken by people who swore they loved me. I wrote about the ache of being unseen in a life I had helped build. The words didn't heal me, but they held me steady. The next morning, I slept in again. Then I dressed, not in slacks or steel-toed boots, but in yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. I took a walk around the lake near my apartment, the one I used to drive past every day without noticing it existed. The trees were changing. Gold. Orange.
Red.
They weren't dying. They were transitioning. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I began to remember things I'd forgotten, that I once loved sketching out floor plans by hand, that I used to dream of designing homes that told stories, that I had once imagined being more than just reliable. I had imagined being joyful. Midweek, I got a call from David Levinson, my mentor from grad school, who now ran his own construction firm. I hadn't reached out, but somehow he had heard. "They're saying you quit Dawson and Company," he said. "Is it true?" "Yes."
A pause.
"I'm sorry," he said. "And congratulations." I let out something between a laugh and a sob. "Claire," he said, "you've got options. We'd love to have you here. But more than that, you need to know you're not a failure. You're free."
Free.
That word landed differently. I wasn't unemployed. I wasn't drifting. I was free. By Friday, the silence became less oppressive. I welcomed it. I cooked for myself. I joined a local gym. I watched documentaries that had nothing to do with market trends or subcontractor liability. And I didn't hear a single word from my parents. Not a call. Not a message. Just silence. I had expected guilt.
Panic.
Some kind of apology. But what I got was nothing. The absence of response was louder than shouting. It told me all I needed to know. They weren't ready to face what they had done. But I was. I was finally beginning to face myself. The first thing I did was buy a sketch pad. It was a spontaneous purchase, made during a walk through an independent bookstore Melissa had taken me to. I hadn't held one in years. The pages were thick, inviting. My fingers hesitated before flipping it open, like I was touching a piece of myself I'd buried. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room, cross-legged in soft lamplight, and drew. Not buildings. Not layouts. But feeling. Lines that curved and tangled and bled into new shapes. It was messy and childlike and liberating. I didn't show anyone. By the next week, I had filled 10 pages. Then 20. David Levinson called again. He offered me a consulting role on a mixed-use development in Seattle.
Short term, he said.
"You can come in, do your thing, and get out. No politics. No family drama." I thought about it. Not because I needed a job, but because I needed to believe I still had something to give. So I said yes. Flying to Seattle felt like stepping onto a different planet. Clean slate. No Dawson and Company logo stamped on my laptop. No shadow of my father hovering over every decision. Just me, a blank notebook, and a team that didn't know my history. And they listened. When I spoke, people leaned in. When I proposed a change, it wasn't met with polite nods and hidden resistance. It was debated, improved, implemented. For the first time in years, I felt like more than a fixture. I felt seen. The project was a success. Efficient, collaborative, innovative. And when it wrapped, they asked me to stay. But I wasn't ready to say yes. I flew home to Colorado with something else in mind. My lease was ending soon. And instead of renewing it, I started driving through neighborhoods I'd only ever seen on blueprints. I wanted land, not a building. Just earth, untouched, unclaimed. It took 3 weeks. But I found it, 5 acres on the outskirts of Boulder, where the mountains were close enough to smell the pine, and the sky was wide enough to make you feel small in the best way. I bought it, not as an investment, as a beginning. I didn't know exactly what I would build. A design studio? A retreat center? A home? Maybe all 3. What I knew was that, for the first time, I wanted to build something not for legacy or validation or inheritance. I wanted to build something for myself. In the quiet of those mountains, I started sketching again. I mapped out ideas with no deadlines. I studied eco-conscious architecture and sustainable materials. I reached out to people I admired, not to ask for jobs, but to ask for stories. It became clear that the blueprint I had followed all my life had been someone else's. And now I was drafting my own. I applied for a small business grant. I created a website, nothing flashy, just a space to share my philosophy and showcase a portfolio that wasn't limited to Dawson and Company. I called the company Redline Studio, a nod to the edits that make blueprints honest. Clients began to trickle in. Small ones. Dreamers like me. People who wanted homes with soul, spaces that breathed with intention. I wasn't making millions, but I was making meaning. One night, While reviewing a custom home proposal from a retired teacher who wanted to convert her land into a writer's retreat, I paused. For the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for an apology. I had exhaled.
My family hadn't changed.
They hadn't reached out. Sophie had posted about a new ad campaign for Dawson and Company. I didn't follow, but people sent me screenshots. I didn't feel jealous. I felt free. She could have the company. I had reclaimed my voice. And I was finally building something worth inheriting. It started with a voicemail. I missed the call while walking the perimeter of the land one morning, measuring shadows and testing how the light moved across the hill. The number was unfamiliar, Denver area code, but that didn't narrow it down. I almost ignored it. But something tugged at me, so I played it. "Hi, Claire, it's Mom." Her voice was tentative. Tired. "We heard about Redline. Your father saw a piece about it in the Regional Design Journal. It looks lovely. Anyway, we were wondering if you'd come for dinner." "Just dinner. Nothing else."
She paused.
Then, softer. "It's been almost a year." I stood there, voicemail still echoing in my ear, and felt the earth tilt a little. I hadn't counted the months. I hadn't wanted to. But she was right. It had been nearly a year since I walked out that door. A year since I chose myself. I didn't respond right away. I let the message sit like a stone in the center of my chest. I talked to Melissa. To David. I even asked a local contractor, Rick, who had become a kind of surrogate work buddy, what he thought. He just shrugged. "You show up when you're ready. Not when they are." That Sunday, I drove to the house. I told myself it was just dinner. That I had boundaries now. That this was a visit, not a surrender. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother pulled me into a hug that lasted too long and not long enough. My father stood behind her, his face unreadable. Inside, the house was the same. But I wasn't. The dinner was quiet at first. No mention of business. No talk of Sophie. We danced around landmines like professionals. It was only after dessert, again apple pie, that my father cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." I froze. He wasn't a man who said those words. Not even when he was wrong. "I let fear make a decision I should have had the courage to face with you." My mother nodded, eyes wet. "We didn't know how to choose between our daughters. So we made the choice in silence. And in doing so, we lost you." There was no grand justification. No excuses. Just admission. I didn't cry. I listened. And then I said, "You didn't lose me. You just stopped seeing me." That landed. My father looked down. My mother reached for his hand. "You don't have to forgive us," she said. "But we'd like to know you.
As you are now.
Not as who we expected you to be." I breathed in slowly. Then nodded. "Then let's start there." We didn't talk about ownership that night. We didn't rewrite history. But for the first time, they saw the version of me I had to leave to become. Not their employee. Not the heir. Just Claire. Before I left, my father walked me to the door. "Redline," he said, almost smiling. "Hell of a name." I smiled back. "It's where the real work begins." He nodded, then opened the door. And this time when I looked back, it wasn't to say goodbye. It was to mark a return. I never expected them to become part of my life again, not really. Apologies, no matter how sincere, don't rewrite time. They don't erase the nights I spent questioning my worth, or the years I worked myself raw to fulfill someone else's dream. But something shifted after that dinner. A quiet, cautious thaw. It began with small things. A handwritten note from my mother arrived 2 weeks later, just a folded card with pressed wildflowers and a line that said, "We're proud of what you've made." Then came a call from my father, asking about solar panel integration for a cabin his friend was building. He didn't need my help. I think he just wanted to hear my voice. We were rebuilding, not the way we once did with bricks and mortar, but with smaller materials. Humility, curiosity, time. Meanwhile, Redline grew. Not explosively. Not virally. Just steadily, like roots settling deep before the bloom. My work centered around intentionality. I wasn't trying to be the biggest firm. Just the one people trusted when they wanted to build something honest. One of my early clients was a single mother who had inherited land from her grandmother and wanted to turn it into a community garden and event space. Another was a veteran starting a trauma-informed retreat for other soldiers. These weren't flashy projects, but they mattered. I hired 2 interns from a local technical college. Neither came from wealthy families. Neither had connections. But both had hunger. I saw pieces of myself in them. Not the version groomed to inherit, but the version who wanted to learn, to build. One afternoon, I hosted a site visit with both interns for a micro-home design, and as we stood on the edge of the land, watching the light shift over the soil, I realized something profound. I wasn't just designing buildings. I was designing possibilities. People who had never felt seen were trusting me to imagine lives they hadn't dared to plan for themselves. That was the work now. Not legacy. Not revenge. Healing. And through that, something else began to mend. Sophie emailed me. It was short.
Tentative. Hey.
I know I don't deserve your time. But I just wanted to say, I never should have signed those documents without talking to you. I was trying to prove something. I think we both were. I hope someday we can talk, not about the company. About us. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed my laptop. It took 3 weeks before I replied. We met for coffee. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel. We talked about childhood, about the pressure of expectation, about how different our paths were, and how maybe that wasn't a failure, but a necessary divergence. We didn't leave best friends, but we left better. Redline continued to evolve. I partnered with an eco-design startup and collaborated on a sustainable living model that was picked up by a regional housing initiative. My name was quietly becoming associated with resilience, with rebuilding, on every level. One morning, as I walked along the property line of my own land, the idea came to me not as a plan, but as a pull. I would build something permanent here. Not just a studio. Not just a home. A space for learning. For making. For healing. A space for people like me, people who had been overlooked, underestimated, or broken down by systems that valued polish over potential. A sanctuary for second drafts. It wouldn't bear the Dawson name. It would bear the soul of every blueprint I'd ever marked in red. And this time, no one else would hold the pen. I broke ground in spring. Not with a crew or backhoes. Not with noise or deadlines. Just me, a shovel, and a rented soil auger. The first post hole took me almost 2 hours. My palms blistered. My shoulders ached. But I'd never felt more alive. I wasn't rushing to meet a client spec or an investor's vision. I wasn't chasing approval or performance bonuses. Every inch of earth I turned over was mine, and every decision that followed would be
2.
The house was small by design. 2 bedrooms. A workspace with natural light. A screened porch facing the tree line. I chose reclaimed wood and earthen plaster. Solar panels. A rainwater capture system. It wasn't just sustainable, it was symbolic. I called it the revision house. Because it was a rewrite. A redefinition. Neighbors started stopping by during construction. A retired carpenter offered to help frame the deck. A teenager asked if she could shadow me for a day to learn design. People weren't just interested, they were invested. They saw what I was building. Not just with timber, but with intention. And so, slowly, this house became more than shelter. It became a gathering place. I hosted my first design workshop 6 months later, 10 women, ages 22 to 68, each sketching out their own space. We talked about function, yes, but also memory. What rooms had once made them feel safe. What homes had failed them. What places they dreamed of.
Tears were shed. Lau Katarang.
I realized something that day. I hadn't just built a home. I'd built a conversation. My parents visited soon after. My father brought a bottle of wine. My mother brought homemade jam and asked if she could tour the studio. They walked through slowly, touching walls, pausing by the window seat I had carved from an old workbench. "It feels like you,"
she said.
My father nodded. "And it feels steady." I didn't need them to say more. Sophie visited a month later. We sat on the porch and watched the sun dip behind the trees. She didn't ask to see the whole place.
She just sat beside me.
"I'm sorry I didn't fight for you," she said. "When it mattered." "You didn't know how," I replied. "Neither did I." She turned to me. "But now you do." I nodded. I had. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the house slowly. Room by room. I touched every surface, not out of pride, but out of presence. I had built this, not to prove anything, but to return to myself. At the end of the hallway, I stopped at a blank wall, and I hung the first framed drawing I'd made as a child, a crayon sketch of a crooked little house with flowers too big for their pots and a roof that tilted sideways. I smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. People often ask me now, clients, students, even friends, what it all meant. Losing the business, walking away from my family, starting over from the rawness of nothing. They ask it with wide eyes, half in awe, half in fear, like I might hand them a map to some invisible courage. But the truth is, there was no map. There was only this, a slow, stubborn commitment to listen to the quietest parts of myself. The parts one silenced for years in the name of duty, legacy, loyalty. And when I finally did listen, I found something unexpected. Not rage, not revenge, but clarity. Here's what I tell them now. You don't have to inherit the version of love or success that broke you. You can question the blueprint. You can redraw it. You can leave the house they built for you and build one of your own. I've learned that betrayal doesn't always look like a slap or a lie. Sometimes it looks like being praised for your loyalty while someone else signs your name away. Sometimes it's a birthday forgotten, a decision made in silence, a thank you never given. And forgiveness? It's not a door you walk through once. It's a path. Uneven. Non-linear. Sometimes you move forward. Sometimes you sit down beside the road and cry. But if you keep going, one day you look up and you're no longer walking for them. You're walking for you. The Revision House now hosts retreats. Not large ones. Small circles of people ready to confront their own turning points. We gather not to fix, but to listen. To each other. To ourselves. To the questions we once believed we weren't allowed to ask. Questions like, what do I want? What would I build if no one could take it away? Who would I be if I stopped performing worthiness? I've watched women draw homes with studios they never thought they deserved. Men admit they've spent years building wealth, but never built a room they felt safe in. Teenagers sketch out reading nooks, art corners, walls covered in light. This is my work now. Not as an architect. As a witness. And if I leave behind any message, let it be this. Your worth is not inherited. It is not assigned. It is not up for debate around a boardroom table or a dinner plate. It is yours. You can walk away from anything that makes you forget that. You can begin again. You can build something new. And if no one ever told you that before, let me be the first. You are allowed. You are allowed. You are allowed.